Good day and good evening to all our viewers, wherever you may be. Hope all of you are doing well and in good spirits as the holiday unfolds. My name is Eric Barsatan, incoming ex-chapter of the Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter. Now will be your MC for today's event. On behalf of the officers and members of the Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome all of you to our 11th lecture in our Rizalian lecture series. I especially welcome my fellow Knights of Rizal as well as our friends from the Philippines. A major goal of the Knights of Rizal is to educate people of the life, works, and ideas of our national hero, Dr. Jose P. Rizal, and this lecture series is one way by which our chapter endeavors to help achieve this. Before we proceed, I'd like to remind our participants that the lecture will be for 30 to 45 minutes and will be immediately followed by a 5 to 10-minute reaction from our reactor. There will be a Q&A session after the reaction. For the Q&A portion, we suggest that you write down your questions, identify yourself in our chat space, and then we will read the written questions first before we entertain live questions. This time, I'd like to remind everybody to mute your microphones when you are not speaking. And now I would like to call on Sir Garen Suro, Knights of Rizal, Director of the Early College Program at the University of Hawaii, West Oahu, and our incoming chapter pursuant to introduce our guest lecturer.
Mahalo, Sir Eric. Thank you very much, everyone. Good evening, esteemed guests, colleagues, for joining us from the States, and good morning to those. I know that people are coming in and out. The wonders of technology to connect all of us. For joining us across the world, welcome to the 11th installment of the Rizal Lecture Series, sponsored by the Knights of Rizal Aloha Chapter. It is with great honor that I introduce to you our featured speaker, Dr. Carmelito Nomer es Abolencia. Dr. Abolencia obtained his bachelor's degree in philosophy from Adamson University in Manila, Philippines, and his doctorate degree in educational programs management from Eastern Visayas University in Tacublan City, Leyte, Philippines, where he is also a faculty member of the College of Arts and Sciences and serves as the director of the Student Affairs and Services Office. Dr. Abolencia has presented numerous papers in multiple international fora, such as the 5th Herbert Marcuse International Conference at Kentucky University, and at the 3rd International Conference on Quality in Higher Education at Sakarya University in Turkey. In 2006, he was chosen to represent the Philippines as Youth Ambassador of Goodwill to the 33rd Ship for Southeast Asian Youth Program, a cultural exchange program sponsored by the Japanese government. He currently serves as the national president of the Philippine Association for Sociology of Religion and the director of the Wairai Heritage Center at Eastern Visayas State University. Today, we have the great honor to hear his talk on the topic, the theology of struggle in the Noli and Fili. A big aloha to you, Dr. Abolencia, as we give you a virtual round of applause. Please take it away.
Thank you. At the onset, I'd like to congratulate the Knights of Rizal Hawaii for this event, as well as I would like to express my gratitude to Sir Raymond for giving me this opportunity to share something about Rizal. I'm sure a lot of things that have been discussed in relation to our hero, his life, his work, and others. Okay? But this time, allow me to share a little bit of something which I try to come up with, trying to learn something in Rizal's works, as well as to experiment a bit of what the two novels can be, aside from our usual approach to the two novels. Okay. As a disclaimer, you will also find some leanings in my paper regarding my background, as a Catholic, as well as someone who studied a bit of theology. The two novels of Rizal, Noli and El Filibusterismo, were alarming for the Spaniards. The Spanish government became concerned with what the books could do to the Filipinos, who were under their control. For the friars, the books were alarming because they could bring the poor souls to hell. On the part of the first published book of Rizal, the Spanish were furious, and they sought to that the book would never be imported to Manila. The friars condemned the book as sacrilegious and even threatened the faithful with excommunication for those who would read the book. At the same time, government and military officials responded by beating anyone caught with the book. Though only adding to the popular status of the book, it was condemned by faculty committee in 1887. That same committee delivered the following findings. Number one, heretical, impious, and scandalous to the religious order. Second, unpatriotic and subversive to public order. Three, libelous to the government of Spain and its political policies in the islands. The second book, El Filibusterismo, was equally disturbing for the Spaniards and friars. However, they did not anyone create a committee to censure as the first book, but they were already biased against the second book as a text attacking the government and sanctity of the church. The question we have to ask is, were these intentions of Rizal when he wrote the two novels? Turning our attention to the reasons why Rizal wrote this book, Rizal in his letter to Hidalgo has this to say regarding the Noli. I have replied to the insults that for so many centuries have been heaped on us and our country. I have described the social conditions, the life there in the Philippines, our beliefs, our hopes, our desires, our complaints, our sorrows. I have unmasked hypocrisy that under the cloak of religion has impoverished and brutalized the holy word in order to extract money, in order to make us believe in absurdities, which Catholicism would blush if it would know them. Again, we find similar reasons mentioned by Rizal when he gave a copy to his friend Blumenthal. Partial and bold book on the life of Tagalogs. Filipinos will find in it the history of the last 10 years. Here I answer all the false concepts which have been formed against us and all the insults which have been intended to belittle us. Close quote. In his letter he wrote to Marcelo del Pilar, rather, he mentioned the reason why he wrote the novel. For him, it was to arouse the feelings of his countrymen. He wanted to write something for his country. And it is in this sense that Rizal had said to Ponce, it was written for the Filipinos. It was all the more necessary that the Filipinos should read it. Although the novel was despised by the Spaniards, Rizal found an ally from Emilio Terrero, the Governor General, who asked for a copy of the book. He saw nothing wrong in the novel, but he acknowledged that it caused a stir among government authorities and the Spanish friars as well. He also gave Rizal a security during his short stay in Manila. It is surprising, though, that of all people, a Governor General would become his supporter. On the contrary, the Spanish friars saw to it that he would be punished for purported sacrilege and offense against God and the Church. If it was only a novel, why were the Spanish friars threatened? If Rizal made a depiction of the social condition of his time through his novel, why is it that he made an enemy with the Church? In this paper, I will employ the concept of theology of struggle as a spiritual extension of a national struggle for identity under the conditions of colonialism. I would consider it the way Gustavo Gutierrez posited the concept. Struggle is a pre-liberation activity. This is the need to embrace the concept of theology of struggle as a prerequisite in achieving freedom for the colonial mindset and the colonial system which Rizal had hoped his country would achieve. I would like to use Homi Bhabha's theory of mimicry in order to show the context of theology of struggle in the Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. Oit and Let and Harold posit that mimicry is not just simply imitating or copying. It is also beyond sounds. Rather, mimicry also addresses the issue on objects, ideas, and even the arts. For Bhabha, mimicry is when members of a colonized society imitate the language, dress, politics, or cultural attitude of their colonizer. Bhabha asserts that mimicry emerges as one of the most elusive and effective strategy of colonial power and knowledge. Mimicry is converting the primitive and pagan natives to the image of colonizer, civilized, and Christianized. The two novels were fictional tales, yet it reflects the social milieu at that time. The events depicted in the two stories can be used as a starting point in looking at the relationship between the Filipino and the religion whom the Spaniards introduced. The novels were good representations of what Baba claimed in his theory. Noli showed that within the church there was also struggle for power. At the beginning of the story, Rizal satirically used the simple chair to characterize this. Padre Damaso and Padre Sibilia were trying to fight who gets the chair at the center of the dining table. The chair in the Catholic context symbolizes authority. The Pope, when he pronounces a doctrine, for example, he sits on his cathedral, the chair. Another instance is that Padre Damaso using the pulpit to preach not gospel values, but to scold the alferez, who was one of the faithful attending the Mass. The Curia also gestured to the sacristan to close the doors so the church during his sermon. The pulpit was also used to condemn the Indians. And I quote, all of us should learn by heart the Holy Scripture, the life of the saints, so that I do not have to preach to you sinners, says Padre Damas in his sermon. He further continues by saying, living as you do, like Protestants and heretics who have no respect for the ministers of God, you are going to be condemned. All the worse for you, you wretched ones. Close quote. In El Filibusterismo, supporting the students, the Spanish friars would favor the mestizos and the Spanish students. The church was illustrated as an institution powerful than the government. This was true during the time of Rizal. The friars made sure that Blanco be replaced as court judge for the trial of Rizal, since they noticed that Blanco was fond of Rizal. He was replaced by Polavieja. This ensured them that Rizal would be found guilty. When Ibarra asked the advice of Tasio, the philosopher, he said that all the efforts of building a school will be even if how noble the intentions were, it would be useless if the priests or father provincial would not vouch for it. The government can do nothing. In this case, the people have to content with the right thing to do and what would please the friars. The church becomes an institution as God. Their words are all powerful and all knowing, and the angels would have to live their lives according to the prescriptions of these priests. There is no better way of controlling them than to instill in them ideas about fear of hell and the reward of heaven. But to reach heaven, be with God through fear is not liberation. Man in this sense has no freedom at all. It's not a genuine act of love towards the Creator, but rather a conscious effort to avoid the fire of hell and the social stigma as sinners and worse, an excommunicado. A perfect mimicry. This was also true in the second book, El Filibusterismo. The community never questions the events that took place objectively. For instance, when Cabezang Tales was kidnapped by the Tulisanes, the people never asked why there were Tulisanes, what drove them to the mountains and became bandits. They never thought of why some people would become Tulisanes in the first place. They never saw it as something for which the system and the Spaniards were partly to be blamed. Rather, events like this were explained in the context of faith. For example, the kidnapping of Tales. Sister Pinchang, an old devotee whom Fili was serving, would consider it as a reminder that the Filipinos were sinners, or because it was a remiss of their duties, because they failed to teach these people about piety. This is clearly religious ignorance. The friars exploited people using the faith of the people. These pastors of soul become now the exploiters, while the faithful become the exploited. This exemplifies Karl Marx's theory of religion as nothing but a creation of the superstructure in order to protect the interest of the ruling class. Theology for Vatican became once again the fruit of reflection, reflection on concrete situations, on changes in light of one's faith or Bible. God can be experienced in various ways by man. Man may experience him as a provider, healer, counselor, Father, Savior, and Liberator. The experience of man with God in two novels without bias can be seen from what the friars preach and how the faithful respond to it. The pattern would be God will punish them because they do not obey his laws. In this case, asks them to obey the Divine, serve the church, confess their sins, and not question their authority. But what if these people realize that God is a God of justice and God is also the God of the oppressed? Rizal injected this idea in his novel. Turning to the first novel, we find situations where Filipinos believed that God was also on their side. One peculiar instance was when Elias, the rebel, was trying to convince Ibarra to join the rebellion against the Spaniards. This was what Elias said to Ibarra, and I quote, Elias ended his plea saying, you don't see that the real struggle is coming. It's the voice of God. New ideas make our people united by God, and God, who has never abandoned other people, will not abandon us. His principles are the principles of liberty. The Filipino theology of struggle is that in the midst of their plight, they wanted to experience God as one with them. It is about God saving people not only from sins, but also from their social conditions, as reflected in the Old Testament when God promised Abraham and his people. Again, this idea is also visible in Rizal's second novel, El Filibusterismo. Rizal used the figure of Father Florentino in giving us an idea of Filipino theology of struggle. This was in the last part when Simon was already dying at the hands of the priest. And I quote, I do not know, Senor. I do not read into the thoughts of the inscrutable. I know that he has not abandoned the people who in the supreme moments have trusted in him, judge of their oppression. I know that his arm has never failed anyone when, trampled by justice and drained of all recourse, the oppressed take the sword and fights for his. The Filipino theology of struggle is that in the midst of their plight, wanted to experience God as one of them. It is about God saving people not only from their sins but also from their social conditions. This can be reflected in the Old Testament when God promised Abraham and his people that he would be their guide. Again, the idea is also visible in Rizal's second novel, El Filibusterismo. Rizal used the figure of Father Florentino in giving us an idea of Filipino theology of struggle. This was in the last part when Simeon was already dying at the hands of the priest. And I quote, I do not know, Simeon. I do not read into the thoughts of this inscrutable. I know that he has not abandoned the people who, in the supreme moments, have trusted in him. Judge of their oppression, I know that his arm has never failed anyone when, trampled by justice and drained of all recourse, the oppressed take the sword and fights for his home, for his woman, for his children, for his inalienable rights, that no, God in justice cannot abandon his own cause, the cause of freedom without which no justice is possible. Close quote. Similarly, liberation theology comes from the situation of the poor being oppressed and exploited. This was the condition during the time of Rizal. Elias believed that God would never abandon them because God believed in freedom. He believed God would fight for their liberty. Father Florentino also believed that God also would fight for his people. God now is no longer the God of the Spaniards, the government officials, nor the God of the friars who is preached during Mass, but rather he is the God of the Indians who were exploited, maltreated, uneducated, ignorant, and good for nothing faithful. God is the voice of the voiceless of Filipinos who cried for government reform. Not also the power of the two novel results give us the idea that the life within the church cannot be the center from which one could reflect upon freedom unless freed from mimicking what the colonizers are doing and obeying what the colonizers are imposing on them. I'd like to check if I'm still audible. Can you still hear me? Sir Raymond,
Yes.
can you still hear me? Okay.
Yes, it goes choppy once in a while, but please go ahead, Sir Nomer,
Okay.
Dr.
Can
Valencia.
an idiom as depicted in El Filibusterismo reflect on a God who is just, whose experience which requires corporation, who claim as owners of his land and demanded a yearly increase in the rent of land? Certainly not. Can an ordinary citizen claim protection from the government? Two novels of Rizal tell us otherwise. The Filipino theology is found in the content that it is concerned with the real struggle of the landless idiots. It touches the human experience of suffering under the exploitative and abusive structure of the state and the church. For a Filipino, he would realize God's presence amidst this situation. God feels the hunger, suffers maltreatment, and abuse towards his people. He is a God who will rejoice when one day all Filipinos will be united as one, putting an end to all exploitation, colonial disillusionment, and terrorism. At the end, God will walk with them to a land of justice, peace, united as one nation, as Rizal also hoped for. Education landscape portrayed in the two novels were also a manifestation of what kind of educational system the Filipinos were trying to embrace. The novels portrayed the youth wanting to be educated the Spaniard way. Ibarra wanted to apply what he learned in his travel from Europe by establishing a school. Isagani, Basilio, and the rest of the students wanted reforms in education system in El Filibusterismo, but the friars saw it as a rebellion against the government. Results showed that the way our educational system works would not help the cause of achieving national identity. There is a need to fight off religious ignorance. On the other hand, there is a big difference between the government of the colonial past and the present government. We have now a government which promotes the welfare of the people. It also protects the people from possible threats of life to life and liberty. On conclusion, one may look one may look at the novels as a result's view on religion, but more than looking at it as a work that reflects the hero's view on religion, I would assume it as the stage where one can find his identity as a Filipino. One need to struggle with his colonialistic tendency in terms of his faith, education, and mindset. Rizal wanted to show that his foreign dominants were never true to what they ought to be. This was evident from his views, which were dramatized in two novels. They spoke of God, yet they valued exploitation, corruption, severe punishment, and even death to those whom they think were against them. He wanted to show us that he is concerned with the concrete social structure and the situation of the poor. In relation to the theology of struggle, it shows that how the situation of the marginalized and exploited regard the situations as an avenue for faith experience. It becomes a struggle because the friars say one thing and the common people believe another. Rizal believed that God is God not only to the friars, mestizos, peninsulares, but also to the brown-skinned Filipino who never reads and speaks Spanish but simply on poco. God never closes his eyes to the sufferings and clamors of people for freedom and justice. This is social justice, a preferential option for the poor in the history of the Filipinos as people in a nation. Faith can be an apparatus for social change, where God acts as a leader in leading his people in the struggle towards liberation and freedom. At times, spirituality can be the strength in times of difficulties and hardship, and not as an apparatus to exploit and to be exploited, but rather an instrument However, there are new forms of this enslavement which makes man lose his dignity and self-worth. Rizal, using his two novels, gave us an example on how to do this and what real faith and sense of nationhood can effect social change, thereby making a leap of faith from oppressed, exploited to a more progressive and free nation. Thank you very much and good morning.
Okay, very good. Mahalo, Dr. Abolencia, for that very interesting and thought-provoking lecture. I certainly learned a lot from it. Before I introduce our reactor, I'd like to remind the participants again that they can write questions they want to ask our lecturer in our chat room or space, and we will read them after the reaction. And thank you for that. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to introduce our reactor to today's lecture, Sir Dr. Federico Magdalena, Knights of Rizal, or Sir Fred as we know him. He's an educator and a researcher who has done a lot of work in Mindanao and the search for peace in that area. He obtained his bachelor's degree from the Mindanao State University, his master's degree from the University of the Philippines of Diliman, and his PhD degree in sociology from the University of Hawaii as an East-West Center grantee. He was a professor at the Mindanao State University before moving to Hawaii. He has received several research grants and has a long list of publications. Currently, he is faculty specialist and associate director of the Center of the Philippine Studies at the University of Hawaii at Manoa. Also the current archivist of the Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Sir Dr. Fred Magdalena.
Thank you very much, Sir Eric. And I am thoroughly impressed with the presentation of Dr. Abolencia on the theology of struggle as embedded in the Noli and Fili, the two most important works of Dr. Jose Rizal. I didn't have the chance to take a look at what Dr. Abolencia is gonna present, other than making a conjecture that he would focus on the Noli and Fili and forget about what happens next. I think that's not an error on his part, but in terms of theory, I was just expecting that the theology of struggle, as it is used today, is actually detached from historical accounts, particularly those of Rizal and other ilustrados who initiated the struggle against an oppressor regime way back in the 1800s. Okay, I can see the content of the presentation in terms of the theology of struggle, and at the same time, I'm trying to make sense of what it is today after Rizal, as used by scientists, particularly theorists. From my little readings of the theology of struggle, I realized that there is very little historical origination of this particular theory, which is usually associated with post-colonial theory, after colonization, but doesn't dig further into the past, why the struggle started or when it started. I think Rizal should be credited for initiating the struggle himself, okay? Based on the Noli and Fili. Yeah, he is the first to initiate the struggle as far as the Philippines is concerned. But unfortunately, writers today don't even mention or give credit to Rizal. Neither do they make credit to those people who are contemporaries of Rizal.
Like Isabelo de los Reyes.
Yeah, right. Isabelo de los Reyes and Gregorio Aglipay,
Yes,
they were very concrete, practitioners. They were probably those who implemented in action the ideas that are found in the Noli and Fili. The Noli and Fili are just, ideas, some of which are theoretical, some of which are made up, some of which are even caricatures of the oppression that Rizal observed at the time. But Isabelo de los Reyes and Gregorio de Aglipay put into action those values that are found in these two great novels. Um, by way of illustrating how they are influenced by Jose Rizal, Aglipay and Isabelo de los Reyes are both members of the Ilustrados. Okay, they are all educated just like Rizal, and they are also activists like Rizal. Isabelo de los Reyes was born 1 year after Rizal was born, while Aglipay was born 3 years after Rizal was born. So you can see these three personalities, were in league with each other. They were more or less um, people of the same era, or what do you call that in sociology? They are cohorts, okay? They are cohorts, except that they are action men. Unlike Rizal, was more of a writer, trying to influence people. But from the literature that I read about the theology of struggle, actually, this is a misnomer, according to one writer. And I also believe that this is so because there is nothing religious about the theology of struggle, because the myth of this particular phrase is that it is a social movement for change, okay? It is a social movement wherein the practitioners and the people behind it are trying to change an oppressive regime, liberate people from poverty and hunger, change the political system, which is going nowhere, including dictatorship, which is now very current in the Philippines. So this is part of the concerns of the theory of theology of struggle, which writers have been talking about, which they said started in 1972 and not during the time of Rizal. I'm talking about that event in the Philippines, which is part that movement, that social movement, which writers started calling as theology of struggle. Okay, in 1972, certain people who were affected by the martial law met together and tried to express their disenchantment by forming an association, which sounds Christian. Its abbreviation is CNL, Christians for National Liberation. Okay, and the people who were behind this were religious people. Okay, they include Luis Halandone, the former priest who became a spokesperson of the National Democratic Front of the NPA, and they were negotiating with the government since the time of Marcos until this very day. Also, other religious people who formed the CNL, or Christians for National Liberation, include other religious people like Christine Tan, who was a nun who defected to the left, just like Luis Halandone, and another one, Edicio de la Torre, a priest from the Society of the Divine Word, who spent 9 years in prison during martial law. So all of them started from a religious vocation and then tried to use their knowledge, to liberate people, especially those who are experiencing social injustice under martial law. So this is the kind of struggle that people, especially writers, are now talking about without linking the struggle way back in the past, like what Aglipay and de los Reyes did, what could be found in the Noli and Fili. So I think this will be an occasion to bridge the gap between history way back in the 1800s, where the conditions were also the same as what existed during martial law era until today. So the theology of struggle has continued up to this present moment, whereby people, some of them or many of them are even connected with religious organizations like the running priest, Roberto Reyes, who sympathized with the poor who are marginalized and who are put into the sideline by the government, who always um, uh, promote, a program for the poor as a platform for, getting elected. But once they are in power, they forget about, the poor. So all of these things are the concerns of the so-called theology of liberation, or theology of struggle, which is also connected somehow with theology of liberation, which you mentioned a while ago. But that's more religious than the
Yes.
theology of struggle. Okay, the liberation theology is more religious. Okay, unlike this one, where although some practitioners were religious people, the kinds of movement, the kinds of programs that they undertake have nothing to do with religion. Okay, um, although they are guided by the values of religion, but they don't use religion, to promote their advocacy. In fact, um, those religious people who joined the movement were kind of chastised by the church. Landone was expelled from the church. Um, Balueg,
Balweg.
that priest
Balweg.
also left the church because of his connection with the movement, where he even became a commander of of the New People's Army in the Cordillera. So these are extensions of what has been discussed by Dr. Abolencia as the theology of struggle that began much earlier than 1972 or developed in the 1980s. Okay, so with that said, I would like to point out that the theology of struggle is really a social movement for social change, especially those that have something to do with liberating the poor and correcting social injustice in the community. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Many thanks, Dr. Sir Fred, for insightful comments. We now start the Q&A portion. If our lecturer, Dr. Abolencia, can start it off by responding to the comments of the reactor. Surgeon Colmenares, our chapter commander, will then read the written questions and serve as a moderator.
Dr. Abolencia, thank you very much for your presentation. And Fred, thank you also for the reaction. Dr. Abolencia, do you have any response to the reaction?
Actually, I am. It reminds me of how I started the work, because at the beginning, I wanted to express that Rizal was somehow to be credited with the concept of theology of struggle in the Philippines. However, one is you see when we present papers in a fora, many experts would already question the attempt to really equate the concept of liberation theology, because no apparent literature would say that Rizal might be, in quotation, the instigator together with his compadres or contemporaries like Isabelo de los Reyes and Aglipay. When Aglipay and Isabelo de los Reyes is being discussed, they are also separated from Rizal. So there is no really solid foundation or ground, except that when we use the three works of these three great men in our history, then we can have a resource pointing to the concept of theology of struggle with this group in history. But now I am somehow how do I say it? I am encouraged to somehow coined the concept with the comment of Sir Federico. I'll try to come up siguro with a future study between the three great men. Our instigator, the two is Abelo de los Reyes and Aglipay, with in relation to philocracy somehow, and then Rizal, the contribution of Rizal to this great mind, the two great minds as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Abolencia. I don't see any questions in our chat room, so anybody can just shoot whatever questions they want to ask. Any questions from the audience?
Maybe mine is more of some thoughts rather than questions. I love the word, that term, theology of liberation or theology of struggle. It's very welcoming. It's very liberating. What kind of disturbs me is my observation of today, and I don't know how to call that. We might end up, coining some terms for that. It's certainly a theology, but it's more of theology of, is it theology of oppression or theology of status quo preservation? And yes, there's this term friarocracy, and it is generally referred to as a form of government that is or has been or probably is dominantly controlled or dictated by the church. This phenomenon is not over. We have that happening. There, not only the Philippines, but some strong influences of the Catholic Church on some governments. But in the Philippines, in particular, we have other faiths or religious groups that have gotten into this strong influence. And I don't know if I'm not comfortable dropping names, but these are like religious groups that are more toward like paralyzing reason and analysis, and it's very much similar to what Rizal had been pointing out before, but blinding many members of the congregation so that even if their leaders are charged with corruption, with smuggling, money, or with some sexual misconduct, their members continue to submit themselves to such faith, and it's very difficult to kind of even understand this. May I get some comments from Dr. Abolencia regarding this ongoing phenomenon, without me perhaps, or I could drop. Maybe I should go straight to that. I'll drop a name, Pastor Quiboloy. Yeah, Pastor Quiboloy, and another big Philippine-based church, which is found in many different corners of the globe, and they're very strong and influential and powerful and rich. And are they part of what we may now call theology of I don't know, status preservation or even oppression? Or can you kindly comment on that? There are many things that I myself is kind of struggling to understand here.
I'd like to, this phenomenon of, for example, Pastor Kibuloy and others, even the Catholics as well. For example, we have El Shaddai,
Catholics, Iglesia ni Cristo, Kibuloy, and all that.
Yes, yeah. Okay. There is this element of touching the Filipino psyche, when it comes to drawing up these people. because I believe when one is being touched according to his consciousness and then according to his heart, which is the experience, the attraction becomes easy because what we preach is similar to what the people experiences, what the experiences of the people added to the siguro convincing power of these leaders would be the reward and punishment, which is somehow connected to our belief in the karma as Filipinos. Like, for example, there is a group. I will not mention names. There is a Christian group. It's actually international also because they have other churches around the world. They would start with their preaching, their way of convincing people to join them is to question the belief of people by saying, "Are you saved? Do you know where you are going when you die?" So with this kind of approach, with this kind of campaigning, really people would really be people would think twice, especially if you have I don't know shallow foundation on your faith. So you are easily persuaded, and you can easily be swayed with okay joining such groups. Plus, there is added factor, the so-called charity.
Okay, welcome back, Nomer.
Thank you
Yeah.
po.
Okay.
Maybe
Do we have any other comments or questions? The two things that were mentioned were the theology of struggle as well as the liberation theology. Maybe for the for the interest of the other listeners, can we have a sort of can we distinguish between the two? What's the difference between the liberation theology and the theology of struggle?
The context of liberation theology. That's why I did not use that expression, the concept, mainly because in liberation theology, it's God acting together side by side with the people's struggle. Whether it's religious struggle, social struggle, whatever form of oppression, if the context also of liberation theology is from the Puebla, one espoused by Gustavo Gutierrez. If you're familiar with the concept in El Salvador, so the proponent somehow, if we try to look at that in that context, would be the Jesuits missionaries who were working with the poor people. But in the context of theology of struggle, here we are looking at the struggle of the people in terms of, and I agree with Sir Federico, that in the theology of struggle, here we're talking of class movement and based may it be from the institution or in the society or in any groups that dominates. That's how, although in some contexts there are writers, for example, Dr. Aguilan and the one I mentioned, Dr. Harold and Dr. I forget the name. They look at theology of struggle in the context of a spiritual or an extension of a religious experience. Maybe the starting point for them would be the faith experience of the people.
Thank you, Dr. Abolencia. Any other comments?
I'm Sir John. I'm interested
Yes.
to hear from. I'm interested to hear from some of our. Even I can see from their faces here. Those videos are on. Some of our younger audience, like Mary. We have Marianne, Mary Jacqueline, Jolena, Maribel. What are some of your thoughts? We are just and we are not we are not looking for academic responses here. We are looking for like just human reactions and experiential reactions. So please feel free to share your thoughts.
Well, nobody seems to be interested in. I assume that these are students from the Philippines.
Yeah. And we are not looking for, again, we are not looking for academic ideas or positions or theories and things like that. It's just primarily what your thoughts are related to your observations, and especially so that, and how you think these ideas and these conversations we have may kind of impact you in the future. Anyone? Yeah, there is one interesting thing, if I may continue a bit, and that just some thoughts again. Dr. Abolencia caught me with that statement, like, what happened to Thales? I mean, nobody raised that question. Why Thales became a Tulisan? Yeah, and what led him to become one? Thales, and even in the Noli, we have Bruno and his brother, who was what do you call that, tortured to death, being brought down in a well, etc. Right? Because in the Philippines we do have like some some citizens who go up the mountains and join other movements, and they are labeled and all that. So I'd like you to kind of expand a little bit on that one, and that concern, like the need to raise that question: what made Thales, or our contemporary people now, become Tulisan, or this kind of group of quote unquote bandits, as they would refer them to before?
For one, in the context of the two novels, the moving away from the society, for example, in joining the there was this religious oppression. In the story, there was this yearly list of the tax, yearly list of the tax. There was this every now and then. The prior, by the way, the friars just land grab the land from Thales. Once they saw that the land was progressive and it was being cultivated, so they immediately.
Sir Nomer, I think, yeah, there's echo, but okay. one is now off. I think you have two screens like talking, and they're kind of, yeah. Yeah, if you can turn off the other screens and numbers so that it does not echo in the other in your other device. There are two devices, it looks like, that you're using here. You're off right now.
This one.
Yeah, yes. There was echo earlier. Go ahead, please.
So, as I was saying. Oh no! Wait.
Yeah, looks like it's
Yeah.
worse now.
Yeah, I think that happens when you have two devices on. The two devices try to come in at the same time, and then one will echo the other.
How about? Am I audible?
Okay.
Yeah, you sound okay.
Can you turn off the other device?
Okay.
Yes, maybe.
Okay. Sorry. Let me go back. The starting story of Thales going to the mountains started from the Dominicans grabbing the friars
Land.
grabbing the land. Okay.
Mhm.
So in this sense, the driving force of Thales joining the Tolesanes was that there was this religious oppression, but that religious oppression was in the form of his livelihood.
Mhm.
The corporation, the so-called corporation, is trying to get the products of his labor. Whereas in our context today, the people joining our brothers and sisters in the mountains, the so-called NKs, etc., is not mainly because the church is oppressing them, no? But the form of oppression, there is still the presence of oppression, as alleged by our brothers and sisters joining the 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 movement.
Let's call it. Yeah.
Yes, the movement. So there was even a colleague of mine was we were chatting, and he said, "What are the ideologies, or what are the ideas whom our brothers and sisters are fighting for at the present? Because you see, there is no more martial law, there is no more oppression coming from other groups or other, I don't know, the oligarchs, for example." But I said, maybe ideology, there's one, or maybe there's still existing uh, conflicts between the poor and the rich, but not as strong as that during the time of martial law. Because we remember during martial law, there was really this oppression going on. If you go against the government, you are immediately branded as a rebel, for example. So as I've said in my paper, although there are no more oppressions coming from the church, but new forms of oppressions and exploitation are still happening and still emerging at our present context. And if we look at the division or the distance between the rich and the poor is still widening. You know? Although there are actions being done in order to address the gap, but still the the distance, the social distance between these two groups are still existing. Although it may not be a religious oppression at the present, but the social condition warrants that there is still a struggle between or among our people in order really to have better life, okay, to move from siguro the concept of isang kahit isang tuka. In the onset of pandemic, we see really that the Filipinos struggle much, especially the working force, the working sector of the Philippines. So there are still forms of exploitation, oppressions, although the government are still addressing. One example would be the so-called end of endos, and mga endo. But still, like in Tacloban, if you ask our workers, they're still present. It is still present, although there is so-called the move for end of endos. But we have it here in Tacloban, for example. So I say that the teachings or the ideas of Rizal would still be valid even today. We cannot put them in the bookshelves without any use. We can still use them and we can still apply them today, although in a different context. But the idea and the spirit still the same and remains. Thank you.
I had a description, and that the characters and players on the stage may have changed, but the plot of the story has remained to be the same. It's still the same story of oppression and marginalization, and it has in fact become more complicated and sophisticated. That the oppression sometimes is even, comes in a very subtle way that it's hard for now even people now to recognize the kind of oppression, and so many of them are unconsciously even supporting a system that is oppressing them. And I was looking at some of the news in the Philippines. Election is coming, and again, it's not just in the Philippines. This thing is happening, and I would describe it as both vote buying, but others would say no, tinutulungan lang kami. Yeah, they are just helping us. Yeah. And so you would support one candidate, and then after that you line up, and then you get, some support. So this is what I mean by the situation of oppression, that system of oppression, and that kind of system, a corrupt system, if you may call it, even has become so sophisticated, complicated, and so subtle that it's even hard to recognize it as such. That people end up like supporting the very system that oppresses them, and it continues to exist.
Well, I guess that's all we have. Unless there are any other comments. Okay, Sir Eric.
All right. Again, I would like to thank our distinguished lecturer and our equally distinguished reactor, as well as the participants for this very interesting educational exercise. It is my hope that that this lecture has given us a better understanding of the philosophical underpinnings of the two major books of our national hero, particularly in terms of the theology of struggle, and has likewise given us a better understanding of who our national hero is. So this ends our 11th lecture in the Rizalian lecture series, sponsored by the Knights of Rizal Aloha chapter. Tune in for next Zoom lecture, which will be on December 18th, so just in the next few days, same time. Sir Dr. Michael Chua, Professor of History of the De La Salle University, Philippines, will be our next lecturer. And he will talk on the topic, The Last Days of Jose Rizal, clarifying the clouds in the life of our national hero. Until then, mahalo, aloha to all of you. Take care and always be safe.